Dreams of Meadowsweet. Alara drifted through a dream of Meadowsweet. The air hummed with the drone of bees, fat and fuzzy with pollen. Sunlight, filtered through a canopy of blossom, dappled her skin as she walked, or rather, tried to walk. In the dream, she wore a gown the color of moonlight, embroidered with tiny silver leaves. It was her wedding gown, the one she'd been painstakingly sewing for months, a secret, foolish hope blooming in her chest. But her leg wouldn't cooperate. It dragged, a dead weight anchoring her to the earth, making the simple act of walking towards the dream altar a torturous stumble. She could hear the faint whispers, the barely concealed snickers of the villagers lining the path. Their faces were blurred, indistinct, yet their judgment felt sharp and real, like thorns tearing at her flesh. She forced a smile, willing herself to appear graceful, but the effort was a strain. Sweat trickled down her temples, plastering strands of hair to her forehead. The meadowsweet scent, so intoxicating in reality, now felt cloying, suffocating. Each step was a monumental effort, a battle against her own body, against the expectations of a world that valued perfection above all else. She stumbled, nearly falling, and a wave of shame washed over her. This was her nightmare, played out on repeat in the quiet hours of the night. The dream groom, a faceless figure at the altar, remained still, unmoving, offering no hand to steady her. He was waiting, she knew, waiting for her to prove herself worthy, waiting for her to shed the imperfection that clung to her like a second skin. With a gasp, Alara woke. The morning sun, a gentle presence compared to the dream's harsh glare, streamed through the window of her small cottage. The scent of real meadowsweet, wafting from the garden below, was a balm to her troubled mind. She lay in bed for a moment, the lingering unease of the dream clinging to her like dew. She pushed herself up, the familiar ache in her leg a grounding reminder of her reality. There would be no grand ballrooms, no graceful dances, no easy acceptance in the world beyond her garden. But there was also the quiet beauty of the sunrise, the comforting weight of her old patchwork quilt, and the promise of a new day filled with the simple joys she had learned to cherish. After a quick wash, Alara carefully made her way down the narrow stairs and out into the garden. It was her sanctuary, a riot of color and fragrance that bloomed under her tender care. Roses climbed the walls of the cottage, their velvety petals unfurling in the sun. Lavender bushes buzzed with bees, and herbs, potent and fragrant, grew in neat rows. She moved slowly, deliberately, her hand trailing along the leaves of a rosemary bush. The scent, sharp and clean, helped to clear the lingering fog of the dream. She paused by a patch of chamomile, its delicate flowers a calming presence. It was destined to become tea for a neighbor struggling with a cough. Alara knelt, her movements slow and careful, and began to weed a patch of strawberries. The rich earth felt cool and damp beneath her fingers. She loved the feel of the soil, the tangible connection to the earth, the sense of nurturing life. In her garden, she wasn't defined by her limp, by the whispers and stares of the villagers. Here, she was simply Alara Meadowsweet, caretaker of the land, healer of the sick, a woman with a purpose. As she worked, she noticed old Maggie hobbling down the path towards her cottage. Maggie was a fixture in Oakhaven, a woman whose age was a mystery, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and wisdom. She was also Alara's closest friend and fiercest protector, a beacon of unwavering support in a world that often seemed determined to dim her light. "Morning, little sprout," Maggie called out, her voice raspy but warm. "You're up with the sun, as usual." Alara smiled, straightening up with a groan. "Morning, Maggie. Just tending to my charges." Maggie chuckled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She settled herself on a nearby bench, leaning heavily on her gnarled walking stick. "And they thrive under your care. That's plain to see. You got a gift, Alara, a green thumb and a kind heart." Alara blushed, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing special, Maggie. Just a love for growing things." Don't you go selling yourself short, girl, Maggie said firmly. Kindness is a rare and precious thing in this world. And you, Elara Metasweet, you're overflowing with it. Elara looked away, picking at a stray leaf on her apron. The dream still lingered, a shadow lurking at the edge of her awareness. Maggie, ever perceptive, saw the cloud in her eyes. Troubled sleep, was it? Elara hesitated, then nodded. The usual. Maggie sighed, her gaze softening. Those dreams will fade, child. They don't define you. But they feel so real, Elara whispered. The whispers, the stares, the disappointment. Maggie reached out and took Alara's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me, Elara. Those villagers, they're blind. They see only what's on the surface, the imperfection of your leg. But they don't see the strength in your heart, the compassion in your eyes, the healing power in your hands. But, Elara began, then trailed off, unable to articulate the deep-seated insecurity that gnawed at her. No buts, Maggie interrupted, her voice firm. Your worth isn't measured by how straight you walk or how flawlessly you dance. It's measured by the good you do, the love you give, the light you shine in the world. And you, Elara, you shine brighter than any star. Elara looked at Maggie, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Maggie. I don't know what I'd do without you. Maggie squeezed her hand. You'll be just fine, Sprout. You're stronger than you think. Remember that. You've weathered storms that would break lesser women. Don't let a few silly dreams and the petty judgments of small-minded people dim your spirit. She released Alara's hand and pointed to a cluster of vibrant sunflowers towering over the garden wall. Look at those sunflowers, Elara. They don't apologize for their height, for their boldness. They simply turn their faces to the sun and thrive. You do the same. Elara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and chased away the shadows. I'll try, Maggie. Trying is half the battle, Maggie said with a wink. Now, tell me about that new salve you're brewing for Old Man Hemlock's rheumatism. He's been complaining something fierce. Elara laughed, the sound light and free. She launched into a detailed explanation of the herbs she was using, her voice animated and passionate. As she spoke, the dream began to recede, pushed back by the warmth of Maggie's friendship, the beauty of her garden, and the unwavering belief in her own inner strength. The sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the garden in golden light. Elara, surrounded by her beloved plants and her steadfast friend, felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was still Elara Metasweet, the girl with the limp, the object of whispers and stares. But she was also so much more, a healer, a gardener, a friend, a woman with a heart full of kindness and a spirit that refused to be broken. And that, she realized, was a truth that no dream, no judgment could ever take away. The Baron's arrival. The sun, usually a welcome guest in Oakhaven, hammered down on the road, an oppressive weight. The marketplace fell silent, the lively bartering and chatter extinguished as if a switch had been thrown. Even the village dogs seemed to share the foreboding, playful barks replaced by guttural rumbles. The source of this unease, a dust cloud, an ever-widening stain on the horizon, heralding something momentous, something formidable. Then it materialized, a carriage, ebony as night, drawn by 6 matched stallions, their coats shimmering like dark mirrors. The wheels bit deep furrows into the parched earth, leaving a brutal testament to the power that had passed. A dozen mounted guards flanked the vehicle, their visages hard, their armor catching the light in sharp, aggressive flashes. Baron von Hesse was here. Mayor Olsen, whose round frame usually projected geniality, wrung his hands, a nervous tick. Perspiration beaded on his brow, staining his already drooping collar. He smoothed his thinning hair, a futile gesture toward composure. He'd known, of course. A terse, arrogant missive, delivered by a rider with eyes like glacial ice, had warned him. The Baron would arrive, and the Baron's desires became reality. The carriage ground to a halt before the town square, a jarring protest of wood and metal. The lead guard, a mountain of a man distinguished by a livid scar cleaving his face, dismounted and flung the carriage door open with theatrical force. The atmosphere thickened with anticipation. Baron von Hesse emerged. He possessed an unnatural height, his frame swathed in a coat of deep crimson velvet. A silver chain, heavy as a ship's cable, adorned his chest, displaying his house's crest, a wolf rampant, snarling against a sable field. His features were etched and severe, his eyes a glacial gray that seemed to dissect the very soul. A cruel smile flickered at the corners of his mouth. The mayor swallowed, his throat suddenly dry, and rushed forward, bowing low. "Baron von Hesse," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Welcome to Oakhaven. We are honored by your visit." He gestured vaguely at the empty square, now deserted save for the furtive glances from behind shutters and market stalls. "We have prepared lodgings at the Golden Barrel Inn." The Baron's gaze swept over the village, dismissing it with a contemptuous sniff. "Lodgings are superfluous, Mayor Olson," he said, his voice a low, sonorous rumble that vibrated through the air. "I am here on specific business." He paused, letting the silence amplify the weight of his pronouncement. The guards shifted, hands hovering near their sword hilts. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. "I am here to select a bride." A communal gasp swept through the onlookers. The mayor's face drained of color. He'd suspected this, of course. Whispers had plagued the taverns for weeks. Rumors of the Baron's frantic quest for a wife, tales of his ruthlessness and whimsy. But to hear it declared, in their tranquil village, felt like a sentence of doom. "A bride, my lord," the mayor croaked, his voice thin and reedy. "But, surely," the Baron silenced him with an abrupt gesture. "Surely you understand, Mayor, that a man of my standing requires a fitting consort, one capable of producing heirs, managing my holdings, and reflecting favorably upon my lineage." His gaze sharpened, raking over the hidden faces. "I have heard tales of the beauty of the women in this region, of their compliance and obedience. I trust these tales are accurate." The mayor stammered, groping for suitable words. He knew Alara would be exempt with her predicament, yet the thought of any of the other young women yoked to this monster filled him with icy dread. "Indeed, my lord," he finally managed, his voice a strained rasp. "Our women are virtuous and lovely." The Baron's smile widened, a predatory curve lacking warmth or empathy. It was the smile of a hunter relishing the chase. "Excellent," he purred, his eyes gleaming with unsettling anticipation. "Then I shall commence my selection at once." He turned to his guards. "Gather the eligible women. Bring them to the square. I wish to inspect them all." Chaos erupted. Women shrieked, children wailed, and men surged forward, their faces etched with fear and defiance. The guards remained impassive. They unsheathed their swords, the polished steel mirroring the villagers' terror. Mayor Olson, his face a frozen mask of horror, stumbled forward again, his voice trembling like a leaf. "My lord, surely such urgency is unnecessary. We could arrange a celebration, a gathering where you might meet the women in a more civilized fashion." The Baron's laughter cracked through the square, a harsh, discordant sound. "Civilized? Mayor, I have no interest in civilization. I require results, and I intend to acquire them. Now." He gestured impatiently, and the guards advanced, their blades glinting ominously. The villagers scattered, their dreams of a peaceful existence in Oakhaven evaporating like morning mist. Baron von Hesse had arrived, and Oakhaven was forever changed. A terrible choice. The Oakhaven meeting hall, typically redolent with the familiar sense of wood smoke and shared suppers, now reeked of apprehension. The Baron's decree loomed, a leaden shroud suppressing clear thought. Mayor Olson, his complexion ashen and glistening with perspiration, wrung his hands before the assembled villagers. "We must remain composed," he urged, his voice fragile as spun glass. "Panic benefits no one." His plea was met by a rustle of anxious throats and hushed anxieties. Women huddled together, their gazes flitting nervously towards the boarded windows, half expecting the Baron's men to breach the room. Men shuffled their feet, rough fingers toying with their caps. Composed, a voice, sharp with hysteria, sliced through the mayor's weak attempts at reassurance. Martha Grimshaw, her face a roadmap of worry etched by concern for her daughters. How can composure be found when that monster intends to steal one of our own? A mumble of assent rippled through the hall. The subsequent quiet pulsed with dread. The implication hung unspoken. A selection had to be made. A sacrifice offered to appease the Baron. Surely, began Thomas Blackwood, his tone laced with doubt, surely an alternative exists. Perhaps a generous offering of goods? A tribute to prove our fealty. Olson shook his head, his jowls quivering. I attempted to reason with him, Thomas. He demands a bride, an heir. His desires were explicitly laid bare. The words echoed, unavoidable and burdensome. Any lingering hope in the room fizzled, replaced by the stark reality of their plight. A voice emerged from the depths of the crowd, a low rumble. Silas, the miller, a man respected for his practicality, even amidst hardship. We can't all afford to lose a daughter. The farms, the livelihoods. Our women are vital. His words, though stark, were honest to the point of brutality. Every unattached woman in Oakhaven contributed to their communal survival. To remove one would be a crippling blow. Silas's statement settled over them like a damp fog. The unspoken question now hung palpably. Who was the most disposable? Whose absence could they bear? Alara Meadowsweet was absent. She rarely graced town gatherings, preferring the peaceful seclusion of her cottage and the company of her herbs. She was perceived as different, kind-hearted, gentle, and undeniably gifted with healing arts, yet hobbled by a limp she'd carried since childhood. More often she was pitied than valued. The seed of thought, once sown, sprouted swiftly. Eyes began to drift, subtly at first, then with mounting boldness, towards a corner where Alara's cousin, Bess, sat nestled against her mother. Bess, though loyal to Alara, offered no defense. Alara. The name escaped Martha Grimshaw's lips, a mere breath. Yet it was enough. A wave of shame engulfed Thomas Blackwood. He knew Alara well. He had witnessed her care for the sick and wounded, her hands gentle and her spirit generous. He had even brought her his ailing livestock to heal on more than one occasion, unable to pay, but knowing she would offer assistance regardless. No, he said, his voice stronger than he intended. We can't do that. His protest was met with a grumble of opposition. And who do you propose, Thomas? Silas demanded, his voice keen. Your own sister? My daughter? We all have families to shield. The pressure intensified. Thomas felt his resolve buckling under the weight of collective dread. He glanced at Bess, her face averted, and recognized, with a sinking feeling, that he stood alone in his defiance. But Alara, Thomas stammered, searching for the right expression, words that wouldn't damn her further. She's a healer. We need her skills. We need wives, Thomas, another voice chimed in. Women to bear children. Women to toil in the fields. Alara, she's limited. The word lingered, cruel and unforgiving. It was the unspoken judgment that had always trailed Alara, the reason for her perpetual exclusion, for never truly being seen. Mayor Olson, sensing the shift in sentiment, saw an opportunity to seize command. He cleared his throat, his voice regaining an edge of authority. Perhaps this is the most pragmatic course. It would be a significant sacrifice for Alara, but she is resilient. He avoided Bess's gaze. Thomas knew he was beaten. He surveyed the room, seeking a single sign of support, a hint of disagreement. But all he encountered were faces hardened by fear, eyes brimming with a desperate need to safeguard their own. He swallowed hard, a bitter taste rising in his throat. I still question the decision, he mumbled, his voice nearly lost. But I grasped the sentiment. His capitulation sealed Alara's fate. A communal sigh of relief rippled through the chamber. The decision was finalized, the grim resolution complete. Mayor Olson, his complexion still wan, but now etched with a grim resolve, stood tall. Then it is agreed. We will present Ilara Meadowsweet to Baron von Hesse as our offering. The words reverberated in the hall, a death sentence for Ilara's aspirations. A surge of guilt washed over Thomas. He had failed her. He had stood idly by and allowed her to be offered up. He shut his eyes, unable to bear the burden of his own cowardice. As the meeting dissolved, the villagers moved with a newfound sense of purpose, a macabre sense of reprieve. They had made their choice. Now, they had to bear the consequence. Thomas remained behind, the weight of his inaction crushing him. He knew he ought to seek Ilara, to forewarn her, to offer some solace. But he found himself unable to face her. He was consumed by shame. He slipped out of the meeting hall, unnoticed, and dissolved into the gathering twilight, abandoning Ilara to her destiny. The air still throbbed with fear, but now it carried something more sinister, the foul scent of shared guilt. The rejected bride, Ilara Meadowsweet, faced the fractured mirror, her reflection a spectral echo of her former self. Hope, a deceptive temptress, had once again betrayed her, whispering promises of belonging only to steal them away. Despite the dread clawing at her insides, a nascent anticipation flickered. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wouldn't be the cataclysm she anticipated. The gown, rescued from the village's threadbare theatrical collection, was faded cream silk, its lace tinged sepia with age. A tad loose, it had been painstakingly refitted by Martha, the baker's wife, whose rough hands proved surprisingly adept with needle and thread. Martha, whose son Finn often graced Ilara's doorstep with forage blossoms, small mercies against the vastness of her loneliness. A lavender haze permeated the tiny cottage. Old Bess, the village herbalist, had insisted on the fragrant ablution, guaranteeing serenity. It did little to quell the tremor in Ilara's fingers as she struggled to braid her hair, each strand feeling coarse and unyielding, an embodiment of her perceived flaws. Her reflection snagged her attention once more. This time, she studied her eyes, the color of jade after a spring shower. They held reservoirs of understanding, a silent fortitude that contradicted her fragile facade. Perhaps that was enough. A hesitant rap echoed through the cottage. Martha's voice, coated with strained optimism, called, "Ilara, dear, it's time." Ilara inhaled deeply, the lavender scent filling her lungs, and stood. Her limp seemed exaggerated as she moved, a persistent reminder of her perceived inadequacy. She instinctively reached for the crutch, a simple wooden staff her father had carved before his demise, an extension of herself, a symbol of her endurance. But today, it remained leaning against the wall. Today, she would confront her destiny, however brutal, unassisted. The village square was a panorama of somber faces, a tableau of grim expectation. Banners bearing the Von Hesse crest, a wolf rampant, snarling in defiance, snapped in the breeze, their garish hues a stark contrast to the prevailing gloom. The air hung heavy with the cloying sense of fear and wood smoke. Mayor Olson, ashen-faced, stood on a makeshift dais, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles shone white. He appeared to be awaiting his own sentencing. As Ilara drew closer, a hush descended. All eyes bore into her, assessing, scrutinizing. She felt their pity, their unease, their poorly concealed relief that it was her, and not them, who stood there. Thomas Blackwood lingered at the edge of the gathering, his gaze fixed on the cobblestones, his expression a mask of remorse. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Mayor Olson cleared his parched throat, his voice trembling as he commenced the ceremony. He spoke of tradition, of obligation, of the Baron's supposed magnanimity. Each word landed like a lead weight on Ilara's chest. He indicated the imposing gates of the Von Hesse estate in the distance. "And now," he announced, his voice cracking with anxiety, "we await the arrival of Baron Von Hesse." A wave of nervous anticipation rippled through the crowd. Every eye shifted toward the gates. Minutes stretched into an interminable span. The only sounds are the rustling leaves and the frantic drumbeat of Alera's heart. Finally, a horn blared, a resonant declaration that reverberated through the valley. The gates groaned open, revealing a procession of armored guards astride massive war horses. At their vanguard rode Baron von Hesse. He was a figure of formidable presence, encased in black leather and steel, his features obscured by the shadows of his helm. He surveyed the scene with an appraising, predatory gaze. He dismounted with an agility that belied his size and strode toward the platform, his boots clattering on the stones. Mayor Olsen bowed deeply. "Baron von Hesse," he stammered, "we present Alera Meadowsweet, chosen by the village of Oakhaven as your bride." He gestured toward Alera, his hand trembling visibly. The Baron halted before her, his gaze sweeping over her from crown to toe. The silence was absolute. Alera held her breath, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She tried to meet his eyes, to convey that she was more than simply a flawed girl, that she possessed worth, that she possessed a spirit. Then he spoke. His voice, deep and cutting, shattered the silence like glacial ice splintering. This is the offering you dare present to me? Mayor sensualud convulsivedi. She is the finest we have, your lordship. The Baron emitted a harsh, joyless laugh. The finest? Behold her. She is imperfect, damaged. Do you deem me a simpleton? He leveled a gauntlet finger at Alera's leg. She limps. She is second-rate merchandise. A collective gasp arose from the onlookers. Alera's face flushed with humiliation. The fragile hope that had bloomed within her withered and died. Tears stung her eyes, blurring her vision. "I shall not accept this mockery," the Baron continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "I demand a bride befitting my station, one of beauty and strength, not a defective creature fit only for the refuse heap." He turned his gaze on Mayor Olsen, his eyes narrowed to slits. "You have failed me, Olsen. You have 3 days to locate a suitable replacement or suffer the consequences." With that, he spun on his heel and strode back toward his mount, leaving Alera standing alone, exposed to the pitying and now openly scornful stares of the villagers. The banners bearing the von Hesse crest seemed to taunt her, flapping in the wind like banners celebrating a cruel conquest. The ensuing silence was punctuated only by Alera's subdued sobs. The world had confirmed her deepest fears. She was disposable, into the whispering woods. The Baron's insults reverberated within her, a brutal catalog of perceived failings, too frail. That uneven gait, eyes so vacant. Each pronouncement was a stinging nettle, lacerating what little remained of her self-esteem. The villagers' derisive laughter spurred her onward. Cobblestones sharp against her bare skin, and the gasps of wedding guests as she blundered past became meaningless. Only escape mattered. Oblivion beckoned. Tears distorted the familiar lane into a phantasmagoria. Festooned ribbons, blooms, and triumphant banners appeared to jeer, a gaudy spectacle of joy forever beyond her reach. A stumble, the throb of her afflicted leg. Yet she pressed on, a raw imperative to outrun the encroaching shame driving her. Destination unknown, only flight from the judging gazes, those pitying looks, the whispers that clung like burrs. The village sounds, music, cheerful banter, jubilant cries celebrating the replacement, reseated, supplanted by the hushed anticipation of the woods. The whispering woods. Alera had always given those shadowy depths a wide berth, a realm of veiled secrets, where the wind carried mournful plaints. Grandmother's tales painted them as a haunt of capricious sprites and hapless wanderers swallowed by the gloom. But now, the woods were sanctuary, a place to nurse her wounds in solitude. She plunged into the clutching undergrowth, thorns snagging at her bridal gown, damp leaves chilling her skin. The air thickened, rank with the musk of loam and decaying vegetation. Sunlight struggled to pierce the leafy ceiling, draping the ground in permanent dusk. Taunts and jeers were replaced by rustling leaves and the lonely croak of a raven. a somber note echoing the hollowness within. She pushed onward, breath hitching, heart a frantic drum. Her wedding dress, once a beacon of dreams, now felt like a winding sheet, clinging, suffocating. A hidden root sent her sprawling on a mossy earth. Winded, she lay there, gasping, trembling. Then sobs, born of utter desolation, ripped through her. Burying her face in rough-spun fabric, she wept, the forest floor absorbing the tears, as if thirsting for them. Only the gentle gurgle of a nearby stream persisted, a constant, soothing counterpoint. An undeniable impulse drew her toward that sound. The stream, a slender thread of silver, snaked between the trees. She knelt and splashed icy water on her face, the shock a welcome jolt, a reminder of sensation. Her reflection, pale, swollen, red-rimmed eyes staring back. The finery, delicate lace, shimmering beads, ruined with mud and tears. A shattered figurine, unwanted. A tidal wave of despair threatened to engulf her. Utterly alone, cast out by the village, rejected by the baron, deemed worthless. What purpose remained? Why strive? Why hope? When disappointment was her immutable fate, she closed her eyes, craving dissolution, to simply fade into the forest shadows and become nothing. The stream's murmur swelled, a siren song promising oblivion. Yet, a faint voice, barely audible against the water's music, resonated within. Resilience, stubborn hope. Grandmother stories surfaced, tales of indomitable women who met trials with strength and dignity. The voice reminded her of the kindness she had shown, the small acts of grace that brightened the lives of others. It reminded her that she was more than mere appearance, more than the limp, more than the baron's vitriol. She was Alara Metasweet, kind, strong, indestructible. Tears still fell, but now tinged with defiance. She would not be broken. She would not be defined by their cruelty. She would forge her own path, her own destiny. Rising, legs unsteady, yet resolve hardened. The woods remained dark and enigmatic, but less menacing, more an invitation to a trial. She drew a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and damp soil. Lost, alone, heartbroken, yes, but also liberated, unburdened by expectations, freed from judgment, at liberty to discover her true self. She turned her back on the stream and ventured deeper into the whispering woods. The journey would be arduous, yet she was ready. Nothing to forfeit, everything to gain. The injured bird, the whispering woods, a terrifying green blur in her initial headlong flight, slowly relinquished its harshness. Alara, drained and aching, didn't plunge into deeper gloom, but stumbled into an unexpected haven of light. Not sunlight, precisely. Rather, the arboreal ceiling had fractured, revealing a concealed glade, an intimate sanctuary formed by ancient trees. Diffuse, forgiving light kissed the mossy floor. A tiny brook gurgled through its heart, bordered by time-worn, gray stones. The air vibrated with the drowsy buzz of bees and a fragrance of unknown wildflowers. This was a universe removed from Oakhaven, from censorious gazes and brutal judgments, light years from the baron's scornful lip. She collapsed by the murmuring water, its coolness a welcome salve on her fevered face. Her reflection offered a warped image, puffy eyes, grime-smeared cheeks. She resembled some wild, broken things spawned from the woods themselves. A near-silent peep, almost swallowed by the rustling leaves, pricked her ears. Trauma had sharpened her senses. She tracked the sound to a cluster of ferns huddled at the base of a colossal oak. A bird rested there, diminutive, no bigger than her palm, feathers the shade of sunset. It trembled, its obsidian eyes wide with fright. A wing jutted out at an impossible angle, snapped clean. Alara's heart ached. She recognized that posture of utter helplessness, knew the bitterness of being branded worthless, crippled, and left to languish. Slowly, cautiously, she extended a hand. The bird recoiled, attempted a hop, but the injured wing betrayed it. "Easy," she rasped, her voice rusty. "I won't." She gently scooped it up, cradling it in her hands. Its miniature form shuddered against her skin, a frantic pulse beating against her palm. Back at the stream, she moistened a corner of her already filthy kerchief and dabbed at the bird's soiled plumage, removing grit and dried blood. It pecked weakly at her fingers, but she persisted, her touch light as thistledown. "There, hush," she crooned. Nearly done. Cleaned, the extent of the damage became clear. The wing was grotesquely twisted, bone protruding. It would never soar again unassisted. Resolve surged through her. She wouldn't let this creature suffer her near fate. It wouldn't be cast aside, forgotten. She pictured her grandmother, her hands etched with wrinkles, yet skilled at repairing everything from frayed seams to fractured spirits. She recalled the woman's herbal remedies, the poultices she fashioned. Long-dormant knowledge began to awaken within her. She plucked broad leaves from a nearby plant, mashing them between her fingers until their soothing aroma filled the air. Not her grandmother's specific herbs, but they would suffice. She needed something to cleanse the wound, alleviate the throbbing. Then, she carefully tore strips from the hem of her already tattered underskirt. The fabric was rough, yet the only option. Delicately, she aligned the broken wing as expertly as possible, using a small twig found nearby as a splint. She secured her crude construction with the strips, winding them around the bird's body. It chirped a feeble protest, but Alara continued, her touch firm yet tender. "I know it stings," she soothed, "but it will help you mend." Bandaged, the bird looked infinitesimally small and fragile, its injured wings swathed in makeshift linen. She held it close, feeling its faint warmth. She couldn't abandon it here, exposed and vulnerable to the night. But where to take it? She possessed no destination, no haven. Then a memory sparked, the hollow in the ancient oak, confined, yet sheltered and elevated beyond the reach of ground predators, superior to the perils of the open forest floor. She rose, legs protesting from kneeling, and cautiously ascended the oak's lower limbs. A struggle, her body screaming and spirit flagging. Yet she persevered, driven by the primal need to protect the delicate creature in her hands. Finally, she reached the hollow, dim, yet cushioned with velvety moss and desiccated leaves. Gently, she nestled the bird within, ensuring its comfort. "I'll return," she breathed, scarcely audible. "I'll bring you sustenance." Descending, her movements slower, more measured now. Exhausted, body and soul, but a nascent spark of purpose had been lit. Though rejected and humbled, she could still nurture this defenseless creature, still exert an influence, even in this overlooked corner of creation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting long shadows across the glade, Alara knelt at the stream once more, cupping the water to drink. Cool and revitalizing, it banished some of the grime and despair. She glanced back at the oak, at the diminutive hollow sheltering the injured bird. The future remained obscure, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't forsake this creature. She would tend it, foster it, and facilitate its recovery. In so doing, perhaps she could begin the arduous work of healing herself. The shadows gaze. Sunlight, fractured by the dense foliage above, created a mosaic of light and shadow on the earth. Alara, lost in concentration, hummed a quiet air as she meticulously adjusted the makeshift splint on a small bird's injured wing. Woven from slender twigs, cushioned by downy moss, and secured with strands of spider silk pilfered from a nearby fern, her handiwork was delicate but firm. The thrush, speckled like autumn leaves, uttered a faint chirp, its obsidian eyes fixed on her with trust. A sudden commotion in the undergrowth ripped apart the tranquility. Alara's breath hitched, her senses on high alert. Not the familiar rustle of squirrels or the sigh of branches. This felt markedly different, deliberate, even measured. Every nerve screamed. The once peaceful glade became a potential trap. The bird, sensing her apprehension, quivered in her palms. The disturbance resurfaced, closer now, emanating from a dense thicket of thorns. She recoiled, instinctively cradling the bird, snippets of her grandmother's hushed warnings about denizens of the deep woods echoing in her thoughts. Creatures best left undisturbed. Then he materialized, not a fanged monster from folklore, but a figure draped in an absolute, consuming darkness. Not particularly tall or physically imposing, a tangible aura of latent energy radiated from him. His cloak, a void of blackness, billowed even in the still air. A cowl concealed his features, leaving only a pale crescent of skin visible above the collar. A chill, sharper than winter's bite, seized Alara, far surpassing even the Baron's dismissive contempt. This was primal, ancient. He remained motionless, merely stepping into the clearing, his presence a crushing weight. Unusually, the skittish thrush was transfixed in Alara's grip. Even the forest seemed to hush itself. Swallowing hard, Alara's voice, a bare thread, escaped her lips. Who are you?" He offered no reply, his hidden gaze locked on her. The silence stretched, an unbearable chord pulled taut, punctuated only by the distant cry of a crow. Alara felt exposed, prey under scrutiny. Then, a nearly imperceptible tilt of the head. His focus wasn't solely on her. It was the bird. She watched, captivated, as he seemed to dissect the small creature. The way light danced across its iridescent plumage, the graceful arch of its damaged wing, the subtle palpitation of its fragile chest. A timeless interval passed. Then, the shadow shifted his attention, those unseen eyes now piercing into Alara. She braced herself for anger, repulsion, even violence. Instead, something flickered there, unreadable. Curiosity? Disdain? Or perhaps approval? So fleeting it was almost imagined. Unwavering silence, inscrutable. But the oppressive pressure began to alleviate, the air becoming breathable. Heartened, Alara found her voice again, its wing. "It's broken," she managed, with only a trace of tremor. "I'm trying to help." She anticipated scorn, perhaps derision. The shadow remained still, an unblinking observer. Waiting, watching, her apprehension waning. Alara resumed tending the bird, gently stroking its crown with a fingertip, whispering soothing words. "There, little one, you'll be all right." She readjusted the moss padding under the splint, ensuring a comfortable fit. Dipping a leaf into the nearby pool, she offered it to the bird, noting its tentative sips. Stillness. The shadow's presence, while unnerving, morphed from a palpable threat into detached observation. Alara nearly forgot him, lost in the task of mending the wounded creature, dabbing its plumage with a moistened cloth, reassessing the splint, murmuring reassurances. The sun began its descent, casting elongated silhouettes across the clearing. Finally, as twilight seeped through the trees, Alara carefully settled the bird back into its nest, a hollow lined with feathery moss, sheltered by a broad leaf. Turning back, she expected the shadow's departure. Yet, he remained, a dark outline against the encroaching darkness. Then, a subtle gesture, a barely perceptible inclination of his head, a nod, and then, without a sound, he vanished, evaporated, leaving Alara alone once more. She remained rooted, heart hammering a frantic rhythm, mind reeling. Who was he? What did he desire? Why this silent scrutiny? The only sound was the delicate chirping of the thrush, a frail beacon of hope in the night. Alara shuddered, drawing her shawl tighter. The glade was no longer a refuge, but felt monitored. Yet, beneath the lingering fear, a new sensation took root. Curiosity? A strange validation? No words of solace, no praise. But his very presence had shifted something. She couldn't articulate the change, but knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that her path had veered onto an unexpected course. The Baron's rejection, the villagers' cruelty, had wounded her deeply. But the shadow's gaze, that was something else entirely. A riddle, a peril, perhaps even a chance. A protector of the weak. The forest held its breath. Alara, pulse a frantic drum against her ribs, stood transfixed, the fledgling nestled in her palm. The shadow, no longer merely an absence of light, but a figure solidifying from the gloom, stirred. A beam of moonshine, defying the dense canopy, lanced down, painting his visage in chiaroscuro. It was a face scored with the chronicles of ages, burdens borne, conflicts endured, yet his gaze held an unexpected reservoir of understanding. His voice, a deep earth tremor, resonated. You harbor a singular gift, child. Not an indictment, as she'd steeled herself for, but a statement devoid of rancor. Alara swallowed, her parched throat constricting. She had anticipated derision, even brutality, but not this measured observation. A gift, she rasped, the sound barely a breath. I possess nothing. The Baron's spiteful pronouncements echoed, a relentless, grating litany of her perceived inadequacies. The shadow advanced, and Alara tensed, though she held her ground. The air shimmered around him with an indefinable energy, a blend of authority and lament. You perceive only the reflection they wish to project, Alara Metasweet, where they discern a blemish, an aberration from their myopic view of beauty. I discern potential. He inclined his head towards the bird, its vulnerable wing cradled in her hand. This tiny creature, injured and helpless, sought refuge in your care. You extended compassion, tenderness, despite receiving so little yourself. That, child, is a power they can never fathom, much less wield. Alara's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the bird. But they call me worthless, a hindrance. The words escaped, raw and exposed, a lifetime of absorbed shame finally finding utterance. A flicker of something akin to outrage flashed across the shadow's features, swiftly concealed, but not before Alara registered it. The world abounds with those who seek to belittle, to aggrandize themselves by diminishing others. They grasp at dominion, at riches, at superficial allure, because they dread their own insignificance. They're the truly feeble. He paused, his gaze returning to the bird. My purpose is to shelter the vulnerable, to provide haven for those discarded, forgotten, or actively preyed upon by the cruelties of this world. Alara's mind reeled. What manner of being was this? What were his intentions? And how could he possibly perceive value where all others saw only deficiency? Protect them from what? She inquired, her voice gaining a measure of steadiness, replaced by a burgeoning curiosity. From the malignancy that festers in the hearts of humankind, he responded, his gaze sweeping the forest as if he perceived the decay massed beneath the verdant facade. From prejudice, from avarice, from the insatiable lust for power that devours all in its wake. He turned his attention back to Alara, his expression softening. And sometimes, Alara Metasweet, from their own worst impulses. He descended to one knee, his movements remarkably graceful for a figure of such imposing presence. He extended a hand, not to touch, but to indicate the bird. Kindness is not a liability. Resilience is not a defect. These are the building blocks of genuine strength. The capacity to nurture, to mend, to endure in the face of hardship. These are the attributes that truly define us. But why single me out? Alara blurted, the unspoken question finally erupting. Why would you concern yourself with me? A subtle smile played at the corner of his lips. I have been observing you, Alara. Not merely today, but for some time. I witnessed you share your scant rations with the stray dog, even when your own stomach gnawed with hunger. I saw you defend the village children from the baker's bully of a son. I witnessed you tend to your mother's garden with unwavering devotion, even when your body screamed in protest. He straightened, his shadow stretching, a looming portent in the moonlight. You possess a spirit that refuses to be extinguished, Alara Metasweet, a light that persists even in the deepest darkness. That is why I concern myself. He held out a hand, palm upturned, not as a demand, but as an offering. Come with me, Alara. Allow me to demonstrate that your worth is not dictated by the superficiality of others. Let me instruct you in how to command your strength, how to safeguard yourself, and those who are in need. Let me grant you a sanctuary where your compassion will be celebrated, not condemned. Alara stared at his outstretched hand, a tempest of feelings churning within her. Fear, undeniably, but also a nascent hope, a fragile bud of conviction that perhaps, just perhaps, she was not as insignificant as she had been led to believe. To abandon all she knew, to venture into the unknown with a figure shrouded in mystery, it was terrifying. But the alternative, returning to a life of rejection and bleakness, was even more unbearable. The bird in her grasp chirped softly, as if sensing her inner struggle. She glanced down at it, its tiny, luminous eyes mirroring the moonlight. It depended on her. And perhaps, just perhaps, she depended on it too. She needed to believe she could transcend the limitations imposed upon her. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out and placed her hand in his. His grasp was firm, surprisingly warm, reassuring. As their fingers intertwined, a jolt of energy coursed through her, a sensation of connection, a belonging. I'll accompany you, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper above the susurrus of the leaves. The shadow inclined his head, his eyes gleaming with something akin to deliverance. Then let us depart. There is much to learn and little time to squander. The world requires protectors, Alara Metasweet. And you, my dear girl, possess the heart of one. A choice to make. A silent figure, the shadow stood sentinel at the wood's edge. The air thrummed faintly, a nearly subliminal vibration that resonated more within Alara than as a sound. He promised her refuge, an opportunity to learn and defend. Now, her future's burden pressed heavily. The path ahead is arduous, he intoned, his voice a low growl that reverberated through the ancient trees. It demands sacrifice, fortitude, and a confrontation with the darkness that dwells not only in these wilds, but within the hearts of humankind. He paused, his gaze piercing. I present you with a choice, Alara Metasweet. One route leads further into these woods, toward a sanctuary where you can master your abilities, shielded from the village's judgment. There, you'll find safety, seclusion, and the option of a tranquil, solitary existence. The other is fraught with peril. Alara tightened her grip on the small bird, its fragile frame a stark reminder of mortality. She lifted her gaze to Willow, now perched on a branch overhead, iridescent wings catching the filtered sunlight. The sprite regarded her with unsettling knowingness. What is the other path? She whispered. Return, the shadow declared, the word laden with weight. Go back to the village, not as the shunned bride, but as something more. I will lend you my protection, my counsel. You will learn to protect yourself, to wield your gifts in service of the innocent. But brace yourself for the derision, the dread, the animosity of those who condemned you. The prospect was daunting. To voluntarily re-enter the viper's nest, to endure the villagers' hateful stares, the baron's haughty dismissal. The very thought was almost crushing. Yet, a spark of rebellion ignited within her. Was she destined to live a life of concealment, shrinking into the background? Or could she muster the resolve to stand defiant, to prove her worth? Willow chirped, a crystalline sound piercing the gloom. The currents shift, little Metasweet, she observed, her voice remarkably clear. Sometimes, the only passage onward is retracing steps. Alara knitted her brow, puzzled. What do you mean? Willow fluttered impatiently. The shadow speaks of options. Yet, the genuine choice lies not in direction, but in identity. Will you embody the victim they perceive, or the formidable presence they will come to fear? The words stung sharply. She was weary of being regarded as feeble, as broken. The Baron's rejection had left her feeling exposed, inconsequential. But the shadow's offer, it presented a chance to reclaim her agency, to redefine her very being. What would I do if I returned? She asked, a thread of strength weaving into her tone. You would learn, he answered, to fight, to mend, to safeguard. You would become a bulwark for the defenseless, and you would demonstrate to them all the true face of strength. He extended a hand, not as a plea, but as an invitation. The decision rests with you, Elara. Choose prudently, for once the die is cast, there is no turning back. Silence descended, thick and heavy as a shroud. Alara's gaze shifted from the shadow's offered hand to Willow's enigmatic eyes. The forest seemed to hold its breath, awaiting her verdict. She envisioned her mother, her gentle touch, her steadfast devotion. She recalled the villagers, their averted glances, their whispered slurs. She conjured the image of the Baron, his sneering smile, his dismissive words. And then she thought of the injured bird, its fragile life now cradled in her palms. A surge of protectiveness bloomed within her, an intense drive to shield the vulnerable from cruelty. Fear lingered, a cold weight in her stomach, but it was eclipsed by something more potent, a burning hunger for justice, for validation, for a purpose transcending mere survival. "I don't know," she stammered, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm afraid." The shadow remained impassive. Fear is a tool, Elara. It can cripple you or hone your senses. How you employ it is your choice. Willow swooped, landing gently on Alara's shoulder. "Don't fear the darkness, little one," she murmured in her ear. "It exists only where light shines." Elara inhaled deeply, attempting to calm her racing pulse. She met the shadow's gaze, his features obscured by shadow, but his eyes reflected a glimmer of something absent in the villagers' faces: understanding. "If I choose to return," she stated, her voice wavering but firm, "what becomes of the bird?" A subtle smile touched the shadow's lips. "That, Elara Metasweet, is a question I anticipated." He gestured toward Willow. "Willow will guarantee its safe journey back to its nest and tend to its injuries." Willow preened, inflating her tiny chest. "But of course, the least I can offer such a courageous creature." A spark of relief flickered within Elara. A small consideration, yet significant. It revealed that the shadow, despite his intimidating aura, possessed compassion for the helpless, mirroring her own. She closed her eyes, picturing the village, the familiar lanes, the countenances of those who rejected her. The fear persisted, a persistent ache, but it no longer reigned supreme. There was resentment, certainly, but also a peculiar sense of anticipation, a feeling of standing on the precipice of the extraordinary. She opened her eyes, meeting the shadow's gaze. I choose to return." A wave of energy pulsed through the forest, a palpable shift in the air. Willow emitted a joyous cry, circling Alara's head in a dizzying dance. The shadow merely nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Very well," he intoned, his voice imbued with newfound authority. "Then let our work begin." Facing the village, Elara straightened, the weight of her resolve a mantle settling on her shoulders, a sensation less of sorrow, more of focused intent. The forest floor, a fleeting green carpet during her panicked flight, now grounded her boots with steadfast solidity. "I will return," she stated, her voice amplified with newfound conviction. "I will face them." The shadow, an unblinking presence, acknowledged her declaration with a subtle inclination of his head. "Then let us commence." He moved with a fluid grace that belied his formidable build, guiding Elara through the interwoven undergrowth. An unusual energy thrummed in the air, a delicate vibration that danced across Elara's skin. She noticed the trees appeared to yield before them, thorny tendrils recoiling as they passed. The forest itself seemed to recognize her inner metamorphosis, the dawning power that was beginning to unfurl within her. This return was a far cry from her desperate escape. Gone was the frenzy, the frantic search for sanctuary. Elara advanced with deliberate steps, her attention riveted to the path ahead. She absorbed details previously overlooked: the mosaic of lichen on the bark, the ethereal play of sunlight through the canopy, the hushed stirrings of hidden creatures. Accepting her destiny had gifted her a clarity of perception. The shadow remained a steadfast companion, a silent guardian. He offered no shallow assurances or empty comfort. Instead, he directed her attention to the forest's quiet tenacity, a seedling forcing its way through fractured earth, a bird reconstructing its haven after the storm. He illuminated the strength of patient endurance, the beauty of unwavering resolve. As they approached the forest's edge, the familiar sounds of Oakhaven wafted through the trees. The rhythmic clang of the smithy's hammer, the jubilant cries of children at play, the mooing of cattle in distant pastures. These were the sounds of her birthplace, the haven she'd always known, the place that had so swiftly ostracized her. A knot tightened in Alara's stomach, a blend of trepidation and defiance. She could still retreat, vanish into the forest's embrace, live a secluded existence far from the judgmental eyes of the villagers. But the thought of the innocent, the vulnerable, suffering under the Baron's tyranny, ignited her determination. Fear would not dictate her course. She paused at the tree line, inhaling the crisp morning air. The shadow halted beside her, his presence a comforting anchor. He remained silent, but his stillness spoke volumes. He was there, a bulwark against the impending storm, a wordless pledge of support. Together, they emerged from the woods into the full glare of daylight. The village sprawled before them, a collection of thatched roofs nestled in the valley. It appeared tranquil, idyllic, a stark contrast to the tempest raging within Alara. But she knew the malignancy that festered beneath the surface, the prejudice and apprehension that had taken root over time. Children playing near the village outskirts were the first to spot them. Their laughter evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed gazes. A boy with disheveled hair pointed a trembling finger. "It's her," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "And him." The news spread like a ripple. A woman hanging laundry dropped a damp sheet, her eyes widening in disbelief. A farmer guiding his ox cart reined in his animals, bringing them to a standstill. The blacksmith emerged from his forge, wiping his brow with a grime-coated rag, his expression a complex mix of curiosity and unease. The villagers congregated at the roadside, a silent, watchful throng. They scrutinized Alara, the shadow, their faces an inscrutable mask of bewilderment and fear. Some whispered behind cupped hands, their voices hushed and conspiratorial. Others simply stood transfixed, their eyes riveted on the approaching figures. Alara met their stares, one by one. She registered the fear, the suspicion, the ingrained biases that had colored their perception of her. But she also detected something more subtle, a flicker of uncertainty, a seed of doubt. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were beginning to question the tale they'd so readily embraced. As they neared, the crowd parted, forming a pathway. The air thrummed with tension, thick and heavy as an impending tempest. Alara felt the weight of their judgment, the unspoken accusations hanging in the atmosphere. But she refused to waver. She held her head high, her gaze unwavering, her stride firm and resolute. The Baron's manor stood in the distance, a somber monument to power and entitlement. There she would face her ultimate trial. There she would confront the man who had so callously rejected her. As they moved deeper into the village, a low murmur rippled through the onlookers. The shadow. He guards her. The realization traveled through the anxious villagers. Alara noted that even the village guard, usually quite bold, were reluctant to approach. They clutched their spears, maintaining a respectful distance. A woman, her face lined with concern, pushed forward. It was Martha, the baker, who had always shown Alara kindness. She reached out a trembling hand. "Alara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What is happening?" Alara paused, her heart aching at Martha's worry. "I've returned, Martha," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I've returned to help." Martha glanced from Alara to the shadow, her eyes filled with dread. "Help? But the Baron." "The Baron will discover that strength manifests in many forms," Alara responded, her gaze hardening. "And that kindness is not a deficiency." She squeezed Martha's hand, a silent vow of protection. Then, with the shadow at her side, She continued her journey towards the Baron's manor, leaving behind a village steeped in trepidation and a glimmer of hope. The confrontation had only just commenced. Illusions of cruelty. The air thrummed, not with winter's familiar sting, but with a potent energy that tightened skin and constricted throats. From his balcony perch, Baron von Hesse, a figure of grotesque arrogance, scanned the approaching throng with open disdain. Mayor Olsen, a pace behind, wrung his damp palms, his expression a study in anxious placation. "Behold them, Olsen," the Baron's voice, sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the air, scuttling back like earthworms after a storm. Despicable. At the edge of the meticulously kept lawn, Elara halted, the shadow a looming sentinel beside her. Behind her, the villagers, a nervous knot of humanity, shuffled their feet. Thomas Blackwood, guilt shadowing his features, kept his eyes glued to the cobblestones. Elara felt Martha's steadying hand in hers. The shadow advanced, his movement liquid and unnerving. No shouts, no threats. Only a presence that stirred the deepest wells of fear and respect. Baron von Hesse, his voice resonated, not with a shout, but with a deep, chest-vibrating timbre. "You have cultivated cruelty. Prepare now to gather the harvest." A dry, rasping bark of laughter erupted from the Baron. "And who are you to judge, shadow peddler? Some two-bit conjurer come to spook the children? I wield more power in my smallest fingernail than you possess in your entirety." The shadow inclined his head, a gesture laced with both mockery and profound indifference. "Power isn't tallied in coffers or acres, Baron, but in the impressions etched upon the world. Let's observe the impact you've sculpted." He lifted a hand, and the air warped. Not magic as Elara knew it, the manipulation of elements, but something other, something woven from the very essence of existence, bending and contorting to his will. Above them, a vision unfurled, a scene torn from the Baron's history. A younger von Hesse, still gaunt and grasping, stood before a cluster of villagers displaced by his avarice. Their faces were hollow, their clothes ragged. A woman, cradling a feverish child, begged for mercy, for a sliver of land to till. The young Baron merely sneered, waving a dismissive hand. "Off my land, you mendicants, or face the teeth of my hounds." The image dissolved, replaced by another, this one unfolding within the Baron's opulent manor. Servants scurried, their faces masks of quiet terror. A boy, barely 10, stumbled, scattering silverware across the floor. The Baron, face twisted in apoplectic rage, lashed out, his blow sending the boy sprawling. "Ungainly fool! Worthless!" he thundered. Elara saw the boy's mother, a kitchen drudge, rush to his side, her eyes wide with fear as she darted glances at the Baron. A collective intake of breath swept through the villagers. They'd heard the tales, whispers shared in hushed undertones behind bolted doors. But seeing it, witnessing the Baron's depravity displayed before them, was a revelation. The visions persisted, each more damning than the last. Von Hesse swindling farmers of their livelihoods, heartlessly evicting families from their ancestral homes, denying succor to the ailing simply because they lacked the means to meet his rapacious demands. Every scene was rendered with painful fidelity, the victims' countenances etched with despair, the Baron's a portrait of smug disregard. Mayor Olsen whimpered, collapsing to his knees. He hid his face in his hands, as if attempting to extinguish the horrors unfolding above them. Thomas Blackwood averted his gaze, his shoulders trembling. Elara detected a fleeting glimmer of something akin to contrition in his expression. Initially defiant, the Baron started to perspire freely. His complexion, usually ruddy, became ashen beneath his carefully maintained tan. He sputtered, his voice losing its commanding tone. "Lies, fabrications, illusions, nothing more. Don't believe this charlatan, you simpletons. He seeks to deceive you." But their attention was riveted to the display, consumed by the stark veracity of the Baron's character. They saw the servant's terror, the tenant farmer's destitution, the silent suffering he had inflicted upon their community for so long. The Shadow's voice cleaved through the Baron's frantic denials. These are not mere phantasms, Baron. They are echoes of your deeds, reflections of the murk within your heart. You have erected your fortune and authority upon the backs of others. Now, you will confront the repercussions. The final vision manifested, the most devastating of all. Alara, younger and far more vulnerable, stood before the Baron on what should have been her wedding day. The scene replayed their encounter, word for agonizing word, the Baron's cruel rejection echoing through the air. I cannot take you as my wife. You are flawed, an imperfection I cannot tolerate, the illusory Baron pronounced, his voice laced with disdain. The illusory Alara recoiled, her face collapsing with heartbreak. Alara felt a stab of anguish, a spectral reminder of the humiliation she had endured that day. But this time it was different. This time, she wasn't alone. This time, she possessed strength. The villagers gasped, their faces a blend of sympathy and fierce indignation. They had witnessed the Baron's oppression before, but this felt uniquely egregious. This was a betrayal of their own, a public defilement of one of their daughters. Martha's grip on Alara's hand tightened. Alara met her gaze, detecting a spark of rebellion in her eyes. The villagers, once timid and compliant, were starting to bristle. The illusions had peeled away the Baron's carefully constructed veneer, exposing the monster lurking beneath. The Shadow lowered his hand, and the visions evaporated, leaving behind a silence so profound it thrummed in their eardrums. The Baron stood on the balcony, a ruined man. His dominion, his riches, his meticulously crafted persona, all annihilated. He gazed out at the villagers, desperation glazing his eyes. Don't heed him. I only did what needed doing, for the betterment of Oakhaven. But his words fell flat, devoid of conviction. The villagers had glimpsed the truth, and now they could no longer feign ignorance. The illusions served as a catalyst, a flame igniting the embers of resentment and ire that had been smoldering for years. Alara stepped forth, her voice ringing with assurance. The betterment of Oakhaven? You have bled this village dry, Baron. You have preyed on the defenseless and powerless. Your reign of terror meets its end now. The Baron's challenge. The silence after the Shadow's visions pressed down like a shroud, stifling and complete. Baron von Hesse, whose arrogance had once been legendary, stood diminished, his features a twisted tableau of shock and rage. Nearby, Mayor Olson remained huddled, face buried in his hands, attempting to obliterate the lingering images burned onto his mind. When a Shadow finally spoke, its tone was deceptively mild. Baron von Hesse, it murmured, the words like the chime of glacial bells. Your reign of illusions and artifice has run its course. What merits your continued dominion over this village? A choked sound, a strangled cough, was the Baron's only initial response. He fumbled to regain control, smoothing his velvet coat with unsteady fingers. Merits? I brought advancement, employment. I shielded them from the dangers beyond. The words lacked their customary authority, a plea rather than a command. He scanned the villagers, seeking the familiar flicker of fear and deference. He found only hard-eyed indifference, some faces openly contorted with disdain. A woman, her face a roadmap of hardship, stepped forward. Advancement for whom, Baron? The pittances you paid barely staved off starvation, and protection? You locked away the finest weapons for your personal guard, leaving us prey for wolves and brigands. The Baron flinched as if lashed. Ingrates, he spat, the veneer of civility shattering. I bestowed everything. A low chuckle emanated from the Shadow, a resonant vibration that thrummed through the square. Everything? You offered crumbs and demanded unconditional fealty. You amassed your fortune upon their sweat, their toils, their very lives. It gestured towards the crumbling buildings and the careworn faces. Is this your benchmark for advancement, Baron? The crimson eyes locked onto him, piercing and unwavering. I propose a trial. Demonstrate to these people why they should endure your presence in Oakhaven. Fail, and you will be banished, never to return. The Baron's gaze darted frantically, seeking escape, a loophole, any avenue out. And should I decline? The Shadow's smile broadened, a glimpse of predatory teeth. Declining would be ill-advised. Suffice it to say, Oakhaven has endured sufficient hardship due to inadequate governance, and its suffering will cease. The Baron swallowed, his Adam's apple a frantic pulse. Trapped. He had to play this game, at least for now. Very well, he conceded, a flicker of his former arrogance returning. I accept, but what are the terms of this trial? That, the Shadow responded, amusement coloring its voice, is for you to determine. You know these people, their needs, their yearnings. Prove you can fulfill them, not merely exploit them. A pause, the silence heavy with unspoken implication. You have until the setting sun tomorrow. With a swirl of darkness, the Shadow vanished, leaving the Baron exposed and vulnerable. Emboldened by the Shadow's intervention and fueled by long-simmering resentment, the villagers stirred, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Baron von Hesse, gripped by panic, reverted to the only solution he knew, a crude display of opulence. He marched towards his manor, bellowing, "I'll prove it. You'll all see. I will show you." He reappeared moments later, his guards staggering under the weight of overflowing chests. He wrenched them open in the square's center, scattering gold, jewels, and shimmering silks across the cobblestones. "There!" he roared, his voice ragged. "Take it, all of it. This is what I offer, what I have always offered." He anticipated a chaotic surge, a scramble for the riches he had so carelessly flung. Instead, the villagers stood motionless, their expressions blank. A few children crept forward, eyes wide with fascination, only to be pulled back by their parents. An elderly woman, her face etched with time, stepped forward. She picked up a gold coin, turning it in her weathered hands. "What use is gold?" she said, her voice raspy and faint. "When our children's bellies are empty. What good are gems when our homes crumble around us?" She dropped the coin back into the chest with a dull clang. A farmer, his face weathered by years of sun and toil, spoke next. "We need no baubles, Baron. We need honest wages, protected trade routes, and a leader who cares for more than just his own coffers." The Baron's face fell. He had always operated under the belief that wealth was the universal solvent, capable of buying loyalty, respect, and ultimately, power. Now he realized it was useless. He shifted tactics, attempting to invoke a sense of obligation. "I am your Baron, the rightful Lord of Oakhaven. You owe me your obedience." A young man, barely out of boyhood, stepped forward, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We owe you nothing. You have stolen from us for years, enriching yourself while we starved. You have taken everything and given nothing." The Baron was losing his grip. The ground seemed to sway beneath him, the foundations of his authority dissolving into dust. He had always considered himself invincible, shielded by his wealth and station. Now he stood naked, vulnerable, utterly alone. Mayor Olson, finally lifting his head, regarded the Baron with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Even he, the Baron's most steadfast supporter, had lost all respect. He rose unsteadily and walked away, melting into the crowd without a backward glance. The Baron watched him go, his face a study in despair. He had lost everything: his authority, his riches, even the loyalty of his most trusted confidant. He was truly alone. As the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the square, the Baron understood his failure. He had failed to impress the villagers, to prove his value, to salvage his position. He had lost. Desperation clawed at his throat. He scanned the faces around him, searching for a spark of hope, a glimmer of forgiveness. He found only cold indifference and a simmering undercurrent of something he couldn't quite define, something that felt chillingly like anticipation. He knew what awaited: a healer's touch. A palpable tension hung in the air after the Baron's fall from grace, thick as wood smoke. Doubt clung to the villagers, a damp chill seeping into their bones. Liberation from his tyranny offered a heady draft, yet the future stretched before them, an uncharted wilderness. Then Maggie, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, edged forward, a small hand nestled in hers. Alara, the old woman's voice, a dry rustle, sliced through the quiet. Greta's been ailing for weeks. The Baron, such suffering was invisible to him. Alara's gaze fell upon the child, frail, her complexion like bleached linen against the rugged landscape of Maggie's hand. A ragged cough escaped Greta, a fragile sound that resonated through the gathering. Compassion twisted in Alara's gut, a familiar ache born of past neglect. She remembered the sharp sting of being dismissed, her needs ignored. Now, she held the power to offer the solace she once craved. "Bring her closer," Alara directed, her voice a beacon amidst the uncertainty. The ghost of the Baron's cruelty still flickered, his dismissive words echoing in her mind. But Greta's vulnerability pushed the shadows back. With halting steps, Maggie guided Greta through the crowd, her eyes a blend of trepidation and burgeoning hope. The villagers yielded grudgingly, their eyes tracking the pair with cautious curiosity. Alara knelt, meeting Greta at her level. Despite the feverish haze, the girl's eyes held a spark of inherent goodness, a quiet endurance that mirrored Alara's own. "Hello, Greta," Alara said, her tone a gentle caress. "What troubles you, dear one?" Another cough shook Greta, her slight frame trembling. "My chest. It hurts to draw breath," she rasped, her voice barely audible above the breeze. "And the weariness." Alara reached out, her touch feather-light, testing Greta's temperature with a hand to her brow. Her skin burned. With deliberate care, she examined Greta's throat, noting the subtle inflammation. "How long has this been plaguing you?" "Almost a week," Greta whispered, wincing. Alara closed her eyes briefly, summoning her inner calm. She sifted through the repository of knowledge gifted by the shadow, recalling not only combat and strategy, but the secrets whispered by the earth, the healing potency residing within natural remedies. "I believe I know what ails you," Alara stated, confidence anchoring her voice. "It's a fever constricting your chest." Turning to Maggie, she inquired, "Do you keep any willow bark? Perhaps some thyme as well." Surprise flickered across Maggie's features, but she nodded resolutely. "I believe so, in the shed behind the garden." "Excellent. And honey, if you have it." Alara's eyes scanned the onlookers. "Does anyone possess these things to spare? Time is of the essence." A low murmur rolled through the crowd. Lingering skepticism fought against the palpable reality of Greta's suffering. A woman stepped forth, extending a small earthenware jar. "I have some honey, Alara, for my hives." A man followed, offering a clump of thyme, its fragrance still clinging to the air. "For my garden. Please take it." Alara accepted the offerings with a smile of genuine gratitude. "Thank you. Every contribution matters." Returning her attention to Greta, she offered, "Now, little one, we're going to ease your discomfort." With Maggie's assistance, Alara began crafting the remedy. She painstakingly ground the willow bark into a fine powder using a smooth stone. The thyme, crushed between her fingers, released its sharp, medicinal perfume. She then carefully blended the herbs with the golden honey, forming a thick, potent balm. The air hummed with the earthy scent of the ingredients, a silent promise of restoration and renewed vitality. As Alara worked, she noticed the villagers watching, their faces gradually shedding their suspicion, replaced by rapt curiosity. They had cast her aside as an outsider, a burden, but now they witnessed her skill, her innate compassion, her capacity to heal. The Baron's venomous words, his attempts to belittle her, seemed to diminish in the face of her actions. When the remedy was ready, Alara carefully coaxed a small spoonful into Greta's mouth. The girl's face contorted momentarily at the bitter flavor, but she swallowed obediently. "There you go," Alara murmured, wiping Greta's chin with a gentle hand. "It may taste unpleasant, but it will help you on the path to recovery." She instructed Maggie to administer small doses throughout the day, ensuring Greta remained warm and well-hydrated. As Greta rested nestled in Maggie's arms, Alara rose, addressing the assembled villagers. She understood that easing Greta's fever was merely the first step. The wounds afflicting Oakhaven ran far deeper than a physical ailment. But it was a beginning, a flicker of hope igniting in the prevailing darkness. This remedy will aid Greta's recovery. However, there are other forms of sickness here. Disease manifests not only within our bodies, but can be rooted in hunger, in cold, in a dearth of human kindness. Alara paused, her gaze encompassing each face. We must care for one another, share what we possess. We need to rebuild Oakhaven together brick by brick. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the village square in elongated shadows, the air grew cooler, yet something profound had shifted. The silence no longer resonated with dread, but with a nascent, hesitant hope. Alara had illuminated an alternative path, one paved with compassion and healing. Whether they chose to tread that path remained uncertain. But for now, the seeds of transformation had been planted. Old Maggie regarded Alara, her eyes reflecting a quiet pride. You possess a rare gift, Alara, a true calling. Never allow anyone to diminish it. Alara offered a genuine smile, one that lit her eyes from within. The sting of the Baron's rejection still lingered, but it no longer dictated her identity. She had discovered her purpose, her strength, not in mere appearance or perceived perfection, but in her capacity to heal, to offer comfort, to nurture. And that, she realized, was a power that dwarfed any Baron's dominion. Exposed and defeated, the fever relinquished its hold, a subtle ebb in the scorching heat emanating from Greta's tiny frame. Alara, kneeling vigil beside the makeshift bed, registered the alteration as a welcome coolness against her own fevered skin. For countless hours, she'd soothed the girl with tales inherited from her grandmother, yarns of tenacious blossoms defying barren landscapes, of birdsong piercing the harshest winters. By the window, the shadow stood sentinel, a stark silhouette against the pearly light of dawn. He offered no solace, no spoken assurances, merely his unwavering presence, a steadfast counterweight to the tempest of fear and doubt that threatened to drown Alara. Then he extended a hand, and a filament of amethyst energy, like concentrated twilight, spiraled from his fingertips, enfolding Alara's hands as they rested on Greta's brow. It throbbed gently, an unspoken bolstering of her own curative touch. Alara sensed a surge of vital force, alien yet coursing through her, fortifying her, guiding her intent. The fever retreated further. Greta's strained breaths softened, becoming measured and tranquil. Her pinched features relaxed in slumber. A wave of hushed exclamations washed over the small knot of people gathered beyond the cottage threshold. Initially, fear had kept them at a distance, but the spectacle of Alara's care had gradually lured them nearer, inquisitiveness wrestling with deeply ingrained prejudice. Now, they witnessed color bloom anew in Greta's cheeks, serenity supplanting her tormented agitation. First to break the silence was Old Man Hemlock, his voice a rusty croak. She's mending. Others echoed his pronouncement, hesitant at first. The fever has broken. She slumbers peacefully now. Suspicion began to dissolve, yielding to a nascent hope. Alara, drained yet invigorated, glanced up at the shadow. His expression remained inscrutable, but she thought she perceived a glint of acknowledgement. It vanished before she could confirm it. He simply inclined his head toward the doorway. They await. She unfolded herself gingerly, her knees protesting, and stepped out. The villagers yielded, their gazes a blend of reverence and contrition. Their countenances, hardened by privation and mistrust, now softened by the burgeoning awareness of their error. At the periphery of the crowd stood Baron von Hesse, his arrogance deflated, his ostentatious coat wrinkled and soiled. The braggadocio that had always masked his cruelty had dissipated, leaving a pitiable, diminished figure. He seemed physically smaller somehow, his shoulders bowed, his eyes flitting nervously. Alara advanced towards him, her heart hammering, but her gait unwavering. She halted a few paces away, the distance defining the chasm between the wronged and the oppressor. "The child lives, Baron," she declared, her voice clear and firm. "And with her the truth of your avarice, your brutality, and your deceptions." A ripple of murmurs moved through the throng. Heads turned, eyes shifting back and forth between Alara and the Baron. The enchantment of terror he had woven around them was shattered. Old man Hemlock shuffled forward, his knotted hand extended in supplication. "We erred, Alara. Grant us forgiveness." Others followed suit, their apologies a jumbled chorus of regret and remorse. "We misjudged you terribly. We were blinded by apprehension. We gave credence to the Baron's fabrications." Alara listened, her heart heavy with the weight of their hardship, their short-sightedness. She had craved their acceptance, but not purchased at such a price. She desired them to grasp, to assimilate, to evolve. "It is insufficient merely to offer regrets," she voiced, her tone infused with newfound authority. "You must prove your sincerity. You must reconstruct Oakhaven, not only with stone and wood, but with empathy and understanding. You must nurture one another, bolster one another, and never again permit fear and prejudice to taint your spirits." The villagers nodded, their faces sincere. They comprehended. Greta's recovery was a miracle. Yes, but more than that, it was a symbol, a spur to reformation. Then, old man Hemlock confronted the Baron. "You have misled us, von Hesse. You have exploited us, and you have purveyed falsehoods. Your presence is no longer tolerated in Oakhaven." The Baron's face twisted with fury, then collapsed into despair. "You lack the authority. I am your Baron." "You were our Baron," a woman named Martha hissed, her voice dripping with scorn. "Now you signify nothing." Alara observed, a peculiar blend of compassion and satisfaction churning within her. The Baron had been stripped bare of his dominion, his pomposity, his very essence. He stood exposed, vanquished, utterly alone. "You shall vacate Oakhaven before sunrise," Alara decreed, her voice devoid of emotion. "You shall carry away only the raiment upon your person and the memories of your malevolence. And you shall never darken our doorstep again." The villagers surged forward, their expressions stern. They escorted the Baron to the village limits, shoving him roughly towards the forest trail. He stumbled and fell, his face scraping against the dirt. No one extended a hand to assist him. As the first shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, painting the heavens with hues of gold and rose, Baron von Hesse, the once all-powerful autocrat of Oakhaven, vanished into the shadows of the forest, a broken and defeated husk of a man. Alara watched his departure, then turned her attention back to the village. The villagers were clustered in the central square, their faces marked by hope and resolve. Greta's mother, her eyes brimming with tears, approached Alara and lowered her head in gratitude. "Thank you. You spared my daughter's life. You spared all of ours." Alara gently raised her chin. "We spared each other. Now, let us commence the construction of a new Oakhaven, together." The shadow lingered by the cottage, a silent witness. As Alara prepared to address the villagers, outlining her vision for a more equitable and just society, he pivoted and dissolved back into the obscurity of the woods, relinquishing Alara to her destiny, the improbable leader of a village reborn. Acceptance and friendship. The morning following von Hesse's expulsion arrived with pristine clarity. The air, cleansed of recent anxieties, carried the scent of moist soil and budding optimism. Alara stirred in Greta's room, the child still sleeping peacefully beside her, the sickness broken. Sunlight sliced through the window, illuminating the plain-wood floor with bars of gold. She rose quietly, careful not to rouse Greta. Stepping into the hall, she heard a muffled chorus of voices, a low, troubled drone that permeated the very timbers of the house. She discovered a small gathering in the common room. Mayor Olson at its head, his face a roadmap of exhaustion beyond his years. Thomas Blackwood stood just behind, eyes downcast, his posture radiating shame. "Alara." Olson greeted her, his voice thick with emotion. He extended a trembling hand. Words fail to express our gratitude, or to atone for what transpired. Alara grasped his hand, her touch both comforting and firm. "Gratitude isn't necessary, Mayor. As for apologies, they gain meaning through deeds, not utterances." Olson nodded, a wave of relief washing over his features. "You speak truth. We crave your assistance. To restore Oakhaven, yes, but more importantly, to reclaim our decency." He swept a hand to encompass the group behind him. "We languished under the Baron's tyranny for too long. We forgot how to be honorable." Blackwood shuffled forward, his voice nearly lost in the air. I misjudged you, Alara. Profoundly. About you, about everything. Fear warped my perception. Is there anything I can do to right my wrongs?" Alara studied him, seeing a man humbled by remorse, not the blustering blacksmith she'd known. "Yes, Thomas, there's a path. Channel your strength into construction, not intimidation. Aid those who are suffering. Illustrate true courage for your son." A spark of resolve ignited in Blackwood's eyes. He nodded, his jaw firm. "I will. You have my word." A babble of voices arose as villagers aired their needs and offered assistance. Fields required tending, homes needed repair, the vulnerable required care. They yearned for leadership, direction, a beacon of hope to guide them forward. Alara listened attentively, her mind already sketching solutions. While she couldn't shoulder the burden alone, she knew Oakhaven possessed the intrinsic fortitude to heal itself. They simply needed a gentle push. "I will help," she affirmed, her voice ringing with conviction. "But this demands collective effort. Each of us must contribute our skills and talents for the betterment of our community." Scanning their faces, she saw a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Let's forge a society founded on empathy, understanding, and mutual respect. A society where every individual is valued, irrespective of their differences." An answering murmur echoed through the crowd. Olson stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with renewed determination. "Then let us begin the labor." The following days passed in a blur of activity. Alara moved from dwelling to dwelling, tending the wounded and infirm, employing her healing gifts to soothe burns, set fractures, and ease strained muscles. She imparted to the villagers simple herbal remedies culled from the surrounding woods, empowering them to care for their own well-being. As she ministered, she perceived subtle yet profound shifts in the villagers' demeanor. Fear and distrust yielded to gratitude and esteem. They sought her counsel, not merely on matters of health, but also affairs of the heart. They confided their stories, their aspirations, their anxieties. They were resurrecting not just their homes, but also their faith in one another. One afternoon, while attending to a boy nursing a fall from a tree, she sensed a familiar presence behind her. Turning, she saw the shadow standing silently at the forest's edge, his features hidden beneath his cowl. "You've done well, Alara," he rumbled, his voice low. "The healing has begun." "They are healing themselves," Alara countered. "I simply lend a hand." The shadow paused, then stated, "My task here is complete. I must depart." A wave of unexpected melancholy washed over Alara. She had grown accustomed to his presence, his steadfast strength, his unwavering support. "Will our paths ever converge again?" The shadow hesitated. "Perhaps. The threads of fate may intertwine once more. But for now, I must return to the shadows." A lump formed in Alara's throat. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching, "for everything you've done." The shadow inclined his head, then turned to leave. "Wait," Alara called out impulsively. "Why did you assist me? Why single me out?" The shadow halted, his back toward her. "Because I recognized something within you, Alara. A reservoir of strength, a depth of compassion that remained hidden to others. You were ostracized for your perceived flaws, yet those very imperfections define you. They make you human. He turned back to face her, his eyes catching the flickering sunlight. And the world desperately needs more humans like you. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. But I lack your strength. I cannot wage war as you do. Strength manifests in myriad forms, Alara, the shadow said. Yours resides in your aptitude for healing, for comforting, for inspiring. Never underestimate the power of empathy. He turned once more to depart, but Alara couldn't bear the prospect of him vanishing from her existence. Please, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Don't go. Stay, and become my friend. The shadow froze, his shoulders taut. He remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. At last, he turned back to her, his face still concealed by his hood. Friend? He echoed, as if the concept were alien. Yes, Alara affirmed, her voice fragile. I recognize your solitary nature, but you don't have to be alone. I crave a friend, and I suspect you might as well. The shadow remained mute, his gaze locked on hers. Then, deliberately, he lowered his hood, revealing his face. It was a face etched with the harsh lines of hardship, but also possessed a quiet dignity and a surprising tenderness. His eyes, the color of bruised storm clouds, held a depth of sorrow that resonated with her own. My name is Silas, he said, his voice gravelly but sincere. And I will remain. Relief flooded Alara's being. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that illuminated her face. Welcome to Oakhaven, Silas. Silas mirrored her expression with a faint, hesitant smile that softened his features. Thank you, Alara. As the days lengthened into weeks, Oakhaven began to thrive. The fields were sown anew, the dwellings repaired, and the villagers labored side by side with a rejuvenated sense of purpose. Alara, with Silas at her side, continued to tend the sick and injured, offering solace and guidance to those in need. Silas, initially guarded and withdrawn, gradually began to thaw. He recounted tales of his past, his life spent cloaked in shadows, the battles he had endured, the sacrifices he had made. He tutored Alara in self-defense, teaching her how to safeguard herself and others. He revealed himself to be a surprisingly adept carpenter, assisting Thomas Blackwood in the reconstruction of the damaged homes with a deftness that astonished everyone. The villagers, at first wary of Silas, soon learned to place their trust in him. They came to see him not as a fearsome specter, but as a quiet, reliable ally, always willing to offer assistance. They discovered that beneath his rough exterior beat a compassionate heart. One evening, as Alara and Silas strolled through the village, they passed the town square, where the villagers had gathered around a crackling bonfire, singing and dancing. The air buzzed with merriment and music, a celebration of their hard-won freedom and unity. Alara paused, observing the scene with profound joy. We did it, Silas, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We rebuilt Oakhaven. Silas nodded, his gaze sweeping over the scene. You did it, Alara. You charted the course. Alara smiled, then clasped Silas's hand. We did it together, she declared, and we'll continue forward together as companions. Silas squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with warmth. As friends, he echoed, as they stood together, hand in hand, witnessing the villagers reveling in their newfound unity. Alara knew she had discovered her rightful place in the world. She had found acceptance, camaraderie, and a purpose that filled her heart with happiness. She was no longer the rejected bride, the outcast, the expendable one. She was Alara Metasweet, the healer, the guide, the friend, and she was at last truly home.